Hello there, this is Steve here in Sydney of the lay gnosis website truebluehealer.com, and that's where you can get scientific repeating evidence of the divine spark within yourself that exists in fact in everybody, and the repeatability of the physical scientific evidence particularly suits the Western analytical mindset that many of the viewers of these videos must surely have. And the Western analytical mindset is what has made European civilization the greatest one on earth. Okay, so if you want to go further with what you know and understand and get serious repeating physical evidence of the divine spark within yourself and what it can do for you, just go to truebluehealer.com, spend about 20 minutes there, and you will get some immediate physical evidence that things have changed. So, news from around the world about the Islamic problem and how it's being dealt with or not being dealt with in various quarters of the planet. Some good news, some, what can we say, didactic news that can teach us how to handle our problems in Europe, comes from China. Western China's got a ever-growing population, 7 times the Chinese birth rate of Muslim invaders. That's a population that comes in professing to be peaceful, and then they get revved up. These are the Uyghur people, by the way. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but it's spelled on screen for you there. These are the Uyghur people who were always thought to be Muslim and moderate, you see. And what's happening is they're getting, because of modern communications, they're getting DVDs and discs, a whole lot of hate speech coming out of Pakistan, exhorting them to overthrow China. Only that. The usual intolerance of all other societies, that they have to get in because of the tolerance of other societies, and then as soon as they've got a foothold in sufficient numbers, they have to destroy the host nation around them. Does this sound familiar? So what are the Chinese government doing about this? Well, I'll remind you, the Chinese government, the Chinese people in charge of the Communist Party are far more ruthless than Europeans could ever be. I'll remind you that the Chinese government starves 70 million people, of its own people, to death to sell their food internationally to purchase nuclear weapons technology. Chairman Mao did that to his own people, 70 million dead, you see. That was in the 1960s, okay? So, and then we've got people who practice illegal religions, and street criminals can end up in a jail in China, and their organs are removed to supply organs to the lucrative organ transplant trade, which China leads the world in by sheer numbers. Okay, so now what's China doing in the Western provinces to handle these Uyghur extremists who are breeding 7 times faster, I believe, according to the article I've got, 7 times faster than native Chinese people, and are becoming a bit of a nuisance. What are they doing? Well, number one, they've banned Ramadan in the Western provinces, and the government's even gone as far as providing free meals in the middle of the day. And the implication is that if you don't get one of these free meals, if you don't turn up at the free food van, you could very well end up in jail, because you are practicing Ramadan if you go without lunch, basically. So now that's a pretty harmless thing to do, and you could do it in Europe. That could be done in Europe. That could be the thin end of the wedge. That's another way to deal with moderate Muslims being, what can I say, radicalised by these fanatics from Pakistan. Okay? You will remember that some of these Uyghur people have done some savage machete attacks on crowds of people. Cars have been driven into crowds of people. And guess what? Can I tell you what Ramadan is? It's actually originally a Hindu practice of purification that's going without lunch or something, eating only in the hours of darkness. So the whole day you go without food, you see. And it's originally a Hindu practice. Hinduism was widely practiced in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula pre-Islam. And it was sort of appropriated by Islam and turned into a purification practice to enable people, to prepare them to go out and become mass killers, ambushing caravans and ransacking cities. Living off the booty of warfare is basically what early Islam did. In fact, Islam's never been very productive. They use backward farming methods. because basically that they were a pillaging, raping, looting culture. So that's why there's no Islamic inventions. You can look it up in Wikipedia. There aren't any Islamic inventions. And you'll also notice in the Quran there are no trades mentioned. Nobody's a silversmith or a goldsmith or a builder or a weaver of baskets or anything like that. Whereas there's plenty of mentions and talks about trade in other holy books. So Islam is purely a practice of banditry dressed up as a religion. You see, that's all it is. Might just contrast Islam here with Christianity. I'm sure that you know that Islam says the only way to assure your way to heaven is to kill an unbeliever, the so-called kafirs. Okay, you got that? You've heard this phrase, and you're supposed to shout some slogan, Allah Akbar, as you chop somebody's head off, right? That's the only way to guarantee you will go to heaven. It says so in the Quran, right? So in Islam, you must kill people to get your heavenly deserts. Whereas Christian Bible says thou shalt not kill. Now, isn't that a startling contrast? Isn't that an incredibly dissonant contrast between two religions? Thou shalt not kill and thou must kill. I mean, surely as a debating point, you could make much of that online, on YouTube, on the internet, on chat lines, couldn't you? Goodness gracious. And that's where we come to, I've not seen anyone sort of raise that direct comparison. It's really so simple. Not seen that raised anywhere in debate yet. I'm surprised it hasn't come up. And now, speaking of debate, here's where you, the viewer, you yourself, sitting at home with your keyboard, you can become a very active warrior against Islam to preserve your European civilization. One of the things that's made Western civilization the greatest show on earth in all history is the Western analytical mind, where we need to know how everything works. We disassemble everything and reconstruct it, deconstruct it, to find out how anything works, okay? And that's made European civilization great. Now, you've had the European Western education, and you can do this yourself on YouTube. So you can do it any social media you like, and you could just say, contrast the religions, just the point I just raised. Thou shalt not kill and thou must kill if you are Muslim. The only reason Muslims will deny this is they don't read their own Quran. Okay, it's in the Quran. You can look it up, find the references, have it ready, drop it on Muslims. Muslims don't read the Quran generally. 90% of them don't. When they do, many of them leave the Islam behind. That's on YouTube videos. You can find people who have actually done that. Most Muslims that you will meet coming from third world countries basically are only Muslim because their great-great-grandparents were threatened with decapitation when the Muslims invaded. So they go, yeah, I'm Muslim, sure, I'll pray 5 times a day, whatever you say, yeah, just to stay alive, right? So ever since then, their children, their grandchildren, etc., have to be practicing Muslims, because there's always fanatics who want to accuse you of apostasy, that sort of thing. So it's very much like a communist or Nazi state where your own neighbours dob you in and can get you stoned to death or decapitated, okay? So it's a death cult, it always has been, okay? So for that reason, nobody bothers to read the Quran. 60% of the world, the Islamic world, is illiterate, because they didn't get widely educated like Europe did, because they saw the value in education. The Industrial Revolution needed an educated workforce, a literate workforce, and that's why public schooling was invented by British industrialists. Did that because they saw the need for an educated, literate workforce. And look what we have today, a whole bunch of intellectuals with nothing to talk about except ridiculing European white males and stuff. Well, you could turn your skills, your debating skills, to good use and start disassembling Islam, because Islam falls to pieces under the mildest of analysis. You don't have to look very hard in the Quran. There's people who already show you that. There's a wonderful video on YouTube called Who Killed Muhammad? It's like a murder story. Who actually did it? How did it happen? What were the circumstances? And the way the Quran describes the death of Muhammad is that it's quite stunning. It's said 4 or 5 times in advance that he's going to die. If he's a fake prophet, he will die of oppressed aorta. Okay? Well, he does die of that. So basically the Quran refutes itself and certifies Muhammad as a fake prophet, thus certifying itself, the whole Quran book, as a fake holy book, for goodness sake. You can learn all that just by watching a single video called Who Killed Muhammad? So that might start your career as an Islamic analyst. There's a wonderful man there, sits and teaches you this stuff, and he shows you all the verses. You can read them on screen. He reads them along with you and explains what they mean. And he's some kind of PhD researcher into comparative religions, I believe. So that could start your career. Just learn the basics like that and challenge Muslims everywhere you go. Do you know about the death of Muhammad, where the Quran certifies him as a false prophet? Do you know about that? 632 AD? Do you know about that? Why don't you know? You call yourself a Muslim? For goodness sake. Ask him to comment on it. There are so many mistakes in the Quran that the people in charge, and that's the readers as well, are cautioned not to allow the faithful, that's the believers, not to let them meditate too much on the many, many contradictions in this Quran. That's one of the passages in the Quran. Don't let people read it to get too analytical, basically. So that's another passage basically refuting the Quran. Okay, the Quran refutes itself in numerous ways. So, left to its own devices, the carelessly cobbled together obvious forgery called the Quran, which was cobbled together over hundreds of years, really can't sell itself religiously. It doesn't appeal theologically to anybody, and that's why the only way you could flog Islam was by jihad. That's war, killing people. Will decapitate you if you don't believe and you don't start praying 5 times a day. It was legal to torture people into submission. Many slaves were tortured. You can get first-person accounts written by slaves in the 16th and 17th century, slaves who escaped, who were seriously tortured into becoming believers, and they were treated much better once they became a believer. You just go through the motions. Basically anything to stop your feet being beaten off and that sort of thing, and being branded with hot irons and stuff like that. I've got books written in the 16th and 17th century about it. So there's many ways you can become Muslim, but you never do it by studying the Quran. One of the problems was the Quran was never available in printed form because it's too difficult to print Arabic script. So that really held it behind when printing was invented in Europe, and the 26 separate character alphabet was easily printable, very easily printable, and allowed the proliferation of knowledge and the stimulation of people's brains to greater intellectual efforts, whereas the Quran was almost always inaccessible because there were only handmade copies of it available up to, I believe, about the 18th century or something. So a lot of things have held back Islam, a lot of things, as well as their ludicrous consanguinity, their desire to marry their cousins and visit Mecca and die in combat, and you must kill people as you die in combat, and that guarantees your way to heaven. That's a way to hold back a society and make them focus on death as the major goal of their existence. Can you believe it? So it's a pretty dumb religion, really. If you think about it, it's widely open to serious criticism, and you can just start posting this, videoing this, blogging this, writing about it, asking questions. Most Muslims don't read the Quran. They rely on priests explaining it to them. Okay? That's the gist of it. Now, Islam should have died out when it was the Ottoman Empire was disassembled in 1918, if you think about it. And it did collapse. It was a disaster. It just fell into history, right? Collapsed. What brought it back to life and gave it an artificial reincarnation, an extension of life that really shouldn't have got, was the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia in 1932, where a bunch of nomads who were involved in a war with another bunch of nomads, and they were all into the insalubrious activities of drinking camel piss because it's recommended in their Quran, and digging a hole beside women on the birthbed so that in case the born baby is a girl, she's thrown directly in the hole in the sand and buried alive, okay? That's what the Saudi royal family was doing up till 1932. And then the $1 trillion oil fortune arrived and turned them into moguls fomenting warfare, Islamic warfare all over the goddamn planet, worrying China, destroying Europe and that sort of thing. So the good news is Saudi Arabia's oil is running out. They're also running seriously out of water. They can't afford to produce enough water. It is claimed in articles available right now that the surface temperature, the land temperature is going up, rendering the area more inhospitable to a cheap life. Everything's going to cost more, and they're talking about the end of the Saudi royal family as the society collapses. It's already running into huge debts. And part of that is financial mismanagement because their IQ is, on the average in Saudi Arabia, is 83. It's a lot less than the Western world. And there's even internal Saudi Arabian critics who are listened to, and they say that the oil prices are set by the Saudi royal family like a bunch of juveniles, a bunch of juvenile delinquents. They don't know what they're doing, okay? I'll try and find the article for you and pin it under this video. So all is not well in the House of Saud. Saudi Arabia does not have a great duration into the future where they can just export terrorism ad infinitum. The other centre of doing the same thing is Qatar, Al-Qatar I think it's called. I don't know how long their oil is going to last, but it turns out people don't need Saudi oil anymore. There's so much oil produced. We've got the usual problem of too much oil being produced. Okay, opposite to what the oil companies always tell us that it's running out, it's running out. There's actually too much oil, and we don't need Saudi Arabia. It's finally emerged. So their future's not looking good, and the royal family is not looking anywhere near as firmly in position as you would think they are. If you want someone to blame for who started the Islamisation of Europe, then you've got to go back to the 1960s. It turned out to be, of all people, General de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle. He hated America so much he pulled out of NATO. You may not remember that. But he wanted to create another empire. He decided to surreptitiously, to secretly create an Arab empire where Paris was the headquarters. And the idea was to counter the might of the American empire, which is really laughingly silly. How uninformed and silly can you get? But Charles de Gaulle started Islamising France to try and get back at America. Can you believe it? What cockamamie logic was that? So he started getting the Arab elites to send their children to France to get educated, that sort of thing. And there's all kinds of Arab institutes promoting Islam and Middle Eastern studies in France. So that's why France is the most beleaguered country today under the onslaught of Islamic immigration. Okay? Blame Charles de Gaulle, who took a serious dislike to America, and all he could do was, I don't know, what'd you say, cut his own nose off to spite his face or something like that. He decided to inaugurate the destruction of French culture to get back at the Americans. Can you believe it? What a statesman tragedy that is. What a tragedy for Europe.